following Sunday, phone rings. It was Jeff Sutton, his nephew. Johnny died at 7 a.m. And I have to tell you, life has never been the same since then.
For 30 years, millions watched Johnny Carson host The Tonight Show. They saw the cool demeanor, the perfect timing, the occasional distance. But Doc Severinsen sat next to him every single night, and what he witnessed contradicted almost every rumor about the man. Doc saw Carson write personal checks to cover crew members' medical bills and wedding costs, then demand absolute silence about it. He watched Johnny transform from icy professional to genuine human being the second cameras stopped rolling. He heard about the college tuitions paid, the family emergencies handled, the quiet rescues that never made headlines. And when critics called Carson cold or distant based on 7-minute guest interviews, Doc got frustrated because those people had no idea what happened in the 23 hours and 53 minutes when Johnny wasn't performing for America. The public saw a controlled TV persona. Doc saw 3 decades of private decency that Carson deliberately hid from the world. This is the Johnny Carson that Doc defended until his last breath. Doc Severinsen spent 3 decades sitting 8 feet away from Johnny Carson, watching a version of the host that America never saw. While viewers at home got the polished, controlled performer delivering monologues with perfect timing, Doc witnessed something completely different during commercial breaks and off-camera moments. The transformation was instant. As soon as the red light clicked off, Carson's entire demeanor shifted. His shoulders would relax, his expression softened, and the laser-focused intensity that defined his on-screen presence melted away. Doc told the Spokesman Review in 2005 that this on-camera coolness was pure work mode, a professional character Carson built for efficiency and consistency. But the moment he wasn't performing for millions of viewers, Johnny became calmer, more observant, and genuinely present with the people around him. It wasn't coldness, it was compartmentalization. And Doc watched this happen thousands of times over 30 years, which gave him a perspective that one-time guests or casual observers simply couldn't access. The public saw Johnny Carson the host. Doc saw Johnny Carson the person. That distinction mattered because Carson's reputation took hits from people who met him once and walked away thinking he was distant or unapproachable. But Doc emphasized in interviews that the inner-room view was far more accurate than scattered guest impressions or tabloid speculation. A celebrity might do one stiff 7-minute interview with Carson and leave convinced he was cold. But that brief interaction didn't capture what the nightly staff witnessed. Doc saw how Johnny treated people when there was no audience to impress and no cameras rewarding kindness with applause. After a taping wrapped, Carson would thank crew members by name. Not the stars or celebrity guests, but the lighting guys, the camera operators, the stage managers who made the machinery run smoothly. Doc told reporters this respect for the band and crew wasn't occasional or performative. It was consistent, deliberate, and something he watched happen night after night for 3 decades. Johnny understood that The Tonight Show's success depended on hundreds of people doing their jobs flawlessly under intense time pressure, and he treated them accordingly. But Carson also demanded excellence, and that's where his reputation for coldness really came from. Doc told CNN's Larry King in 2005 that people constantly misread Johnny's intensity during tapings, especially when he'd snap at a writer for a poorly timed cue or call out a technical mistake mid-show. But context mattered. The Tonight Show aired live for years, and later when it moved to tape, the schedule was so tight that mistakes had real consequences. A missed cue could derail an entire segment. A technical glitch could eat up precious minutes they didn't have. Carson kept tight professional standards because chaos and sloppiness didn't just embarrass him, they threatened everyone's jobs and the show's rhythm that millions of viewers expected. Doc framed this as leadership, not cruelty. If you showed up prepared and competent, Johnny trusted you completely. If you wasted airtime with preventable errors, he'd let you know, but he did it privately without humiliating people in front of the entire staff. That kind of controlled accountability was rare for someone with Carson's power, who could have destroyed careers with a single complaint to network executives. Tapings. He'd walk past Doc after a show tapings. He'd walk past Doc after a show with just a quick nod and head straight to his dressing room without lingering for small talk or drinks. He skipped most industry parties, avoided the celebrity circuit, and kept his emotional reactions tightly controlled, even in private moments. Doc pointed out that Carson simply didn't perform warmth or friendliness when cameras stopped rolling, and people mistook that for coldness when it was really just privacy. Johnny's generation valued professional distance and didn't expect bosses to be best friends with employees. He wasn't withholding affection or being deliberately cruel. He just didn't see the need to perform off-duty camaraderie when he'd already given everything to the show itself. And Doc emphasized repeatedly that this didn't mean Johnny lacked basic decency toward his people. The respect showed up in different ways that didn't involve backslapping or forced socializing. One of those ways was money. Doc saw Carson quietly help people financially, but never make a spectacle of it because he genuinely didn't want recognition for what he considered basic human decency. A crew member's medical bills would pile up, and Johnny would write a personal check to cover them, then tell the person explicitly to keep it private. A stagehand's kid needed college tuition. Carson handled it without announcements or press releases. Doc heard about these gestures secondhand from grateful staff members who were instructed not to discuss it publicly with anyone, including other employees. This happened repeatedly over 30 years, not occasionally, but as a consistent pattern that Doc witnessed again and again. One lighting technician told Doc that Johnny paid for his daughter's wedding after budget cuts almost forced a cancellation, then acted like absolutely nothing happened the next morning during setup. Carson's philosophy seemed to be that real help doesn't need an audience, applause, or public credit. And when crew members tried thanking him directly, he'd deflect with a joke or immediately change the subject to avoid the awkwardness of being praised for generosity he thought should be standard. To be fair, Carson's generation didn't broadcast charity the way modern celebrities do on Instagram, documenting every dollar spent for follower engagement. His discretion made cultural sense, but it also meant the public only saw the controlled TV persona and completely missed the private financial support happening constantly behind closed doors. Doc told the Spokesman Review that Carson treated the band as essential to The Tonight Show's identity, not background noise you tolerate or disposable musicians you replace when convenient. And that respect translated into creative freedom Doc had never experienced with other hosts. Johnny let the band punctuate comedy beats, play through awkward transitions, and experiment with arrangements without micromanaging every single note or musical decision. If Doc thought a guest needed a specific intro or a comedy bit required silence instead of a music sting, Carson backed him without questioning the choice. That level of trust was unheard of in television, where hosts typically controlled every second of airtime obsessively, terrified that giving up control would somehow diminish their authority. But Carson understood that music elevated the show's rhythm and flow, and he valued Doc's expertise enough to step back and let him work. When musical bits landed perfectly, Johnny never took credit. He'd gesture to the band and let them have the moment and the applause. Doc explained to interviewers that this trust came from mutual respect, and Carson's belief that surrounding yourself with competent people meant actually letting them do their jobs without interference. But Johnny's hosting genius went way beyond delegating to talented musicians. His real skill wasn't delivering monologue jokes, it was steering conversations when guests froze up or rambled into awkward silence that threatened to kill entire segments on live television. Doc watched Carson rescue countless dying moments by genuinely listening, instead of waiting for his next rehearsed line, or mentally preparing the next question while guests talked. Johnny would lean forward slightly when someone struggled, signaling real attention without embarrassing them in front of millions of viewers. He knew exactly when to jump in with a question that gave floundering guests an escape route from whatever conversational hole they dug themselves into. And he understood when to let silence breathe for a beat, trusting the audience to stay engaged instead of panicking and filling every second with nervous chatter. Doc saw this skill night after night for 30 years, and it separated Carson from every other host who tried late night and failed within a year. The timing came from genuine focus and attention to what was actually happening in the moment, not from formula or tricks he'd memorized from some hosting handbook. And when segments bombed despite everyone's best efforts, Johnny took the blame in the room afterward and never humiliated the guest or writer publicly. That created loyalty and trust that kept people working for him for decades. Doc drew a sharp distinction between what one-time guests experienced versus what the nightly staff witnessed over 3 decades of working alongside Carson. A celebrity might do one stiff interview with Johnny and walk away thinking he was chilly or disengaged, but that 7-minute interaction didn't capture what Doc saw from the bandstand every single night. Guests arrived nervous, Carson stayed professionally focused, and if chemistry wasn't immediately there, both moved on without drama. But that efficiency got twisted into coldness by people who didn't understand the show's breakneck rhythm or the pressure Johnny operated under. Doc emphasized that the inner circle perspective was infinitely more accurate than tabloid gossip or bitter guest complaints, because staff saw Carson during commercial breaks, rehearsals, technical run-throughs, and off-air moments when his guard actually came down. During those 2-minute commercial breaks, Johnny was noticeably calmer and more observant. He'd check in with Doc about pacing or ask crew members if they needed technical adjustments made before the next segment started. That version of Carson never made it into public consciousness because cameras weren't rolling, and staff members didn't sell stories to reporters or write tell-all books breaking the trust Johnny had built with them. What guests experienced was a man doing an incredibly demanding job under crushing time pressure, not someone deliberately withholding warmth or connection to be cruel. Doc pointed out that Carson's entire demeanor shifted the second the red light clicked off. He stopped performing the host character and just existed as himself without all the layers of professional polish required for broadcast television. And after 30 years of watching this pattern repeat itself thousands of times, Doc trusted that consistent private behavior over scattered guest anecdotes that often came from people with axes to grind or book deals to promote. The band watched Carson interact with hundreds of crew members, writers, producers, and network executives in unguarded moments backstage, and the pattern stayed identical year after year. Respectful, fair, and professionally kind without making any kind of performance out of basic decency. Doc said the real Johnny showed up at 6:47 p.m. during technical setup and rehearsal, not at 11:35 p.m. when he was performing for America's cameras and microphones. And depending on who you ask, that distinction either explains everything about who Carson actually was or means absolutely nothing if you're determined to believe the cold persona was real. The crew turnover at The Tonight Show was remarkably minimal for a high-pressure television production. Writers knew exactly where they stood with Johnny. The band stayed loyal for decades without jumping ship for other opportunities. That kind of workplace stability doesn't happen under a cruel or genuinely distant boss who makes people miserable. Doc told Larry King that Carson maintained tight professional standards, specifically because mistakes had real consequences when you're broadcasting to millions of viewers, and people who didn't work in that pressure cooker environment often misunderstood his discipline as meanness or unnecessary harshness. But the staff who actually lived through those standards understood they were protection, not punishment. Carson's leadership style, the boundaries, the emotional control, the professional distance that got criticized so heavily, was exactly what kept The Tonight Show running smoothly for 30 years, without the backstage meltdowns and scandals that plagued other programs. Johnny didn't party with employees after tapings, which prevented the blurred lines and personal drama that destroyed other shows. He kept emotions controlled, which meant decisions got made based on what was best for the show rather than who was currently in his favor. And he maintained professional distance that some people hated, but which actually protected everyone's jobs by preventing nepotism and favoritism from poisoning the workplace. Doc told the Spokesman Review that Johnny's loyalty to the show's people over time mattered infinitely more than isolated stories or complaints. You could find a handful of guests or ex-staff members willing to call Carson difficult, but those scattered negative experiences didn't outweigh 30 years of consistent behavior that Doc and the core team witnessed daily. Carson kept the same crew, the same band, and the same core staff for decades because he created an environment where competent people could thrive without constant drama or chaos. And Doc's frustration with critics always circled back to the same point. Judge Johnny by what the people around him every single night actually saw, not by what guests or tabloids claimed based on limited exposure and secondhand assumptions from people who never witnessed him off camera. The donations Carson made over 3 decades added up to serious money, but he never wanted credit or tax write-off publicity that would have been completely legal and beneficial. Doc watched Johnny support staff members facing medical emergencies, family crises, and personal disasters, always with strict instructions to keep it quiet and never discuss it with press or even other employees who might spread it around. This wasn't occasional charity or strategic PR. It was consistent, quiet decency that contradicted every cold Carson rumor floating around Hollywood. And when those crew members tried expressing gratitude directly, Johnny would shut it down immediately with deflection or humor because he genuinely hated public recognition for what he thought should be standard human behavior. A camera operator's wife needed expensive surgery in the late 70s, and Carson covered the entire cost without hesitation or paperwork demanding repayment. A writer's house burned down in 1984, and Johnny quietly funded temporary housing and replacement furniture while insurance claims processed. Doc heard these stories in confidence from people who felt torn between gratitude and Carson's explicit demand for silence. The pattern continued for 3 decades. Someone on staff would face financial catastrophe, and Johnny would step in before they even had to ask, then make it clear the conversation was over and never to be repeated. One producer told Doc that Carson had a mental list of every crew member's family situation and would notice immediately when someone seemed stressed about money, then find a way to help that felt accidental rather than charitable. Doc watched Johnny slip envelopes to people between rehearsals, always with a casual comment that made it seem like settling an old debt or repaying a forgotten favor rather than outright charity. The amounts weren't small either, thousands of dollars that represented real sacrifice even for someone of Carson's wealth, especially in the early years when The Tonight Show wasn't yet the empire it became. and the recipients formed a silent network of loyalty that lasted long after Carson retired, refusing to break his confidence even when tabloids offered money for real Johnny Carson stories. Doc's final word on Carson never changed across dozens of interviews. Johnny's best qualities emerged when cameras weren't rewarding it. Discipline, fairness, and understated decency that never generated headlines but created a work environment people stayed in for 20 or 30 years straight without wanting to leave. Was Carson's leadership style perfect? Definitely not. His boundaries hurt people's feelings. His privacy got misread as rejection. His professional distance made some employees feel undervalued, even when they were doing excellent work. But did it work for 3 decades of television history that defined an entire era of late-night entertainment? Absolutely. And Doc spent the rest of his life defending that version of Johnny Carson because he'd witnessed it firsthand from 8 feet away for 30 years, which gave him authority that one-time guests and tabloid writers simply didn't have. These Tonight Show secrets show a side of Johnny Carson most viewers never got to see. Did Doc Severinsen's insight change how you see Johnny Carson? Hit subscribe and drop a comment below if so. Doc and Carson's legacy deserve to be remembered forever.